pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
The Bible prophesies that the center of world power will swing to Europe in the times that are just ahead. Could that really happen? If so, how? The prophecy is found in Revelation chapter 13, verse 1 through 2. Listen carefully. Now, I'm talking about the prophecy that foretells that the center for world power will not be America in the end time. It's going to swing to Europe, not to China, but it's going to swing to Europe. The Bible explicitly says it. Listen to the prophecy. Revelation 13, 1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard. His feet were as the feet of a bear, his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. Okay, let's pause there for a moment. If you've been listening to this program for a long time, you probably already know what these symbols mean. However, the symbol of Great Britain is the lion. The mouth of this end-time world government beast is Great Britain. Then the feet of the bear, the symbol of the Russian bear. Russia's official animal symbol is the bear. So Russia is going to be an integral part of the one world government of the end time. Then the body of this beast was the body of the leopard. The leopard is Germany. Then it talks about 10 horns. There's a 10-nation alliance out of which the Antichrist will actually come to power, and this 10-nation alliance will come out of Europe. So this beast describes a Europe-centered power. Russia claims to be a part of Europe. Great Britain. Of course, Germany is the heart of Europe. And then all these 10 nations that will come into this end-time alliance, they're all part of Europe. So the Bible prophesies that this end-time one-world governmental system will be dominated by this European power. And it also prophesies that the leader of this European power will be a personage called the Beast or the Antichrist. So this is what the prophecy has to say. Now, if we look at world affairs right now, it's a little bit difficult to imagine how we could transition from where we are today with the dominance of the United States of America and the rising power of China. Why would the Bible prophesy that there's going to be this very strong and significant shift of world power from the U.S. and from China over to Europe? Europe is going to be the power base of the one world government of the end time, which will be led by the one world leader of the end time, the personage the Bible calls the Beast or the Antichrist. Let's read a little bit more from the prophecy. Verse 5, and there was given unto him a mouth, speaking of the Antichrist, a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months. Throughout the Bible, we're taught that there's a period of time coming called the Great Tribulation, and that it will last 42 months. That's what this is talking about. The reign of the Antichrist in all of his power will be short but very powerful. 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. So he's going to be opposite biblical Christianity. He's going to blaspheme, he's going to make fun of. And then verse 7 says, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints. This is the true people of God. And to overcome them. During the Great Tribulation, many true saints will be overcome. Many will be killed. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. The Antichrist is going to dominate the world. And then it says this in verse 8, and all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Notice the exception there. The only people who will not worship him and give allegiance to him will be those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. Ladies and gentlemen, you need to understand what it takes to get your name in the Lamb's book of life. Jesus Christ came to this earth and he authored a plan of salvation called being born again. In order for you and me to have our name written in the Lamb's book of life, we must be born again. As soon as you say end time, they say, whoa, the end of the world. When's it going to be? And you can see this mask of fear. I'm not telling you the end time is coming. I'm telling you, you live in it right now. Daniel chapter number 7, verse number 4. The first beast was like a lion. We have the eagle used continually to depict the United States of America. You see it on governmental documents. We are the generation for which these that you will not miss one segment of understanding the end time, because I've had many people tell me it's changed their life forever. Many of the major prophecies of the Bible are given to us 2, 3, some of them as high as 4 or 5 times. There is not any chance it's not going to happen, because it's in your Bible, it's prophesied, and the prophecies always come back. Now remember, we began our program today with the statement that the center of world power in the very end times, we're talking about during the final 7 years, the center for world power is going to swing to Europe. Now we've read to you the prophecy of how we know that that is true. That depicts the one world government of the Antichrist. And remember that verse 5 of chapter 13 says, power will be given unto him to continue 42 months. That is speaking of the last 3.5 years of a final 7-year period prophesied at other places in Scripture. So that's what the Bible tells us. From this passage, we know the end time beast is European. And that's what we understand. That's what we need to know. Now, the world has been pushing for world government since World War II. It all began after the war with the founding of the United Nations in 1945. The idea was to create a system of global government that could prohibit war from ever happening again. We had just experienced 52 million fatalities in the horrible war. It was unprecedented in all the annals of history. And yet it happened. 52 million died in that horrible Nazi-precipitated war called World War II. Now, after World War II and after the founding of the United Nations, It was an era of hopefulness. However, it didn't turn out that way for a while, because immediately the Soviet Union moved to capture, in the peace following World War II, what Adolf Hitler had failed to capture during the war. They ended up capturing all of Eastern Europe, placing Eastern Europe behind the Iron Curtain and under the death grip of communism. Well, the other half of Europe remained under the control of the West, the Allies. This situation went on, and it resulted in what was known as the Cold War. So you had the Soviet Union controlling Eastern Europe, you had the Allies controlling Western Europe. This situation went on for 40 years. It was a time of a lot of tension. It was called the Cold War. It never resulted in a full-blown war, but there was continual maneuvering and tensions and trouble spots around the world between communism and the democratic West. So that happened for 40 years. And yet the dream of the United Nations and a successful world government that could control the nations and promote peace, the dream continued to live on even below the simmering embers of the Cold War. Finally, a man by the name of Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union, and by 1989, there was a lot of the controversy that seemed to be abated and solved. You probably remember the words of Ronald Reagan toward Mr. Gorbachev. Mr. Gorbachev, if you love freedom and peace like you claim you do, tear down this wall. And that was the challenge from Reagan to Gorbachev. It wasn't long, a year or two later, until the wall came down. It was November the 9th of 1989. When the wall came down, the world was filled with euphoria. The Cold War is over. It's going to be peace on earth. Within 20 days, President Bush Sr., Mikhail Gorbachev, Pope John Paul II met together, and they came out of their meeting 20 days after the wall fell, announcing the birth of the New World Order. We begin to hear about globalization. We all were told, now you must think globally, because what they were saying was, we're going to dissolve the nation states and we're going to go into a system of global governance. So we will be one world and we will have peace on earth. Well, this all hit somewhat of a hitch in 1990 when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. 1991, President Herbert Walker Bush put together an international coalition to go against Saddam Hussein. President Bush announced very emphatically, this conflict, this Gulf War, is not the United States against Iraq. This is the world against Saddam Hussein. So he painted a picture. He actually put together a coalition of 29 different nations that contributed either supplies or troops to this invasion force that went against Saddam Hussein. They had hoped it would be the last war of the Cold War and the advent of a true new world order. Well, the dream lived on. They kept pursuing it, of course. Saddam Hussein was defeated. Then came Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was very much for one world government. There was a man that was a friend of President Clinton's. His name was Strobe Talbot. And he wrote an article for Time magazine in which he said, in the 21st century, nationalism as we have known it will cease to exist. We will all answer to a single global authority. Well, he wrote that article in 1992. However, shortly thereafter, President Clinton invited him to come to the White House and to serve as Deputy Secretary of State. Of course, the Secretary of State, that's where our foreign policy is administered. That's where all the ideas for running the world come from. So now we have this man who said national sovereignty as we have known it will cease to exist in the 21st century. We will all answer to a single global authority. Well, understanding Bible prophecy and knowing that the Bible prophesies this one world ruler to come, that statement set off alarm bells in my head. Now, it was in Time magazine. I did not know who in the world Strobe Talbot was at the time, but I bought the magazine. I read it carefully, and I thought, oh my goodness, he is proposing exactly what the Bible prophesies for the times that are just ahead. Well, it really sent shockwaves through me when less than 1 year later, President Clinton brings him to the White House to help run our foreign policies. Well, believe me, he did run our foreign policies, because in 1997, President Clinton spoke at the opening of the United Nations. And there he proposed something that the one-worlders had long desired. They wanted a world court that every human being on the planet could be brought before to be placed on trial for certain crimes. Now, if you can be brought before a world court, you will not have the protection of the human rights, of the Bill of Rights, of the U.S. Constitution, none of that. All that would be stripped away. You are now under a higher system of the law, the world court. Well, President Clinton, in his speech before the UN in 1997, said the time has come to establish our long-dreamed of world court. Undoubtedly, he and Strobe Talbot had discussed this in detail. Well, immediately, the international forces and those favoring world government swung into power and swung into action. In the spring of 1998, they had a charter writing conference for this new world court. They decided to call it the International Criminal Court. I think that was in April that they had the charter writing conference. And then in June, from June the 15th until July the 17th, over 30 days, the nations of the world met together and they finished off the charter for this International Criminal Court that would have power over all the nations and all the people within the nations. Well, originally, President Clinton had planned on all cases going to the International Criminal Court being referred to it by the UN Security Council. Now, the reason he wanted that was because the U.S. has veto power over everything approved by the UN Security Council. So consequently, if there was ever anyone recommended to be placed on trial before the International Criminal Court that was from the United States of America, we would have the power to veto that resolution, and it would never happen. However, once the powers that be got together and they were meeting together to pound out the Constitution for the International Criminal Court, they decided that they were going to create an independent head of the International Criminal Court who could try anybody on the face of the earth, and they did not have to be referred to the International Criminal Court by the UN Security Council. That ripped the control out from under the United States of America. Consequently, President Clinton acted like he was not going to join the court until the very last day. Finally, on the last day, he said, well, we're going to join because we would be better able to change the court if we're a part of it than if we are on the outside looking in. So President Clinton did join the International Criminal Court, placing all American citizens under its power. His successor, George W. Bush, he reversed that action. He revoked our signature from the International Criminal Court. When we signed on originally, Israel followed in our footsteps. When we withdrew our signature, Israel also withdrew its signature. Israel had a lot to fear from the United Nations because the UN has been basically or prominently anti-Israeli. So they really feared this International Criminal Court, lest their generals, their soldiers, even their prime minister be summoned before the court and be placed behind bars. Consequently, that's what all was going on during these times of negotiation. Well, when President Obama was elected, he was very much a multilateral person. He believed the world should be run multilaterally. He did not believe that world affairs should be conducted or dominated by any nation. He believed in true global democracy. And all that would be run through the United Nations. So if there were a conflict between nations, they would be required to go before the International Criminal Court. Both of them present their cases. Then the International Criminal, not the International Criminal Court, before the UN Security Council. Then the UN Security Council would make a determination as to what was right, what was wrong, and all the nations would be required to obey it. Now, another very important factor to this whole thing to make it work was global disarmament. One of the biggest segments, biggest departments at the UN is the Department of Disarmament, because the United Nations does not want any guns loose upon the earth except under an international army, a UN army. When you walk on to the yard of the United Nations in New York, the first thing that will meet your eyes is on a big cement stand, a big revolver. It's about 6 feet long, and it's got a knot tied in the barrel, signifying that they believe the key to peace on earth is the total disarmament of the whole world. That's the reason the international community hates our Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, so bitterly. They hate it. And there are many forces here in the United States of America, they believe in world government and they believe in total disarmament. So the vision was, we will disarm the whole world, only the world government will possess armaments, and therefore they will be able to enforce their will upon the whole world, and we'll have peace on earth. One problem: what's going to happen if an Adolf Hitler manages to get control over the only army that's left? Now you're going to have the worst tyranny the world has ever known. People say, oh, but that will never happen. Well, it will happen. The Bible specifically prophesies it's going to happen, but it won't be Adolf Hitler. It will be someone much worse. The Bible calls him the beast, or the Antichrist. We already read about him. And the scripture says the dragon gives this beast his seat, his power, and great authority. If you'll look a few verses before Revelation 13:2, if you'll go back about 5 or 6 verses to Revelation 12, verse 9, it says, I saw the dragon, that old serpent, the devil, and Satan. The dragon is Satan. So Satan is behind this move toward world government that's going to enslave the whole world under this personage called the Antichrist. And he will require the whole world to pledge allegiance or to worship him. And you actually will be worshiping Satan through him. Satan has always wanted the worship that belongs to God alone. He will have 3.5 years before this tried to overthrow God, and consequently he will fail, but he then will come to the earth and he will work through the Antichrist during that final 3.5 years to try to get all the people in the world to worship him, because his number one ambition is to take God's prized creation, the human race, turn them away from God, turn them unto himself, unto Satan, and cause the whole world to worship him. That's Satan's big plan, and the prophecy I read to you today says that's what's actually going to happen. Well, as President Obama continued to pursue the policies of multilateralism, March of 2011, there were problems with Muammar Gaddafi, and Obama wanted to eliminate Muammar Gaddafi of Libya. However, as all this was boiling in the news, Obama never bothered to go to our Congress to ask permission to issue airstrikes against Muammar Gaddafi. What did he do instead? He went to the UN Security Council. They passed a resolution approving this action. One day, the very next day, we were activating the military power of NATO against Muammar Gaddafi. Never asked the Congress of the United States of America, because by that time, President Obama felt like that he was moving from the control of the United States of America, and now we were recognizing this single authority, the United Nations, of the world. And so consequently, he never did get approval from the U.S. Congress for that action. He just took it arbitrarily because now that he thought that the UN was the ultimate authority on earth, not the United States of America. Well, in addition to that, President Obama at this time was promoting migration. There's a huge policy of migration in the UN because they really feel like all the peoples of the world should be able to live anywhere they want to. They believe in a world without borders. They believe that people from Africa should be able to move to America. They believe that they should be able to come from Mexico, from El Salvador, from everywhere on earth. They believe in a total elimination of the nations. They believe in a one world government, a one world population, a world without borders. Well, President Obama was a big believer in this. Of course, he himself had lived overseas and been schooled over there. So he was an internationalist down in the depths of his heart. And so he pursued these policies for the United States of America. Well, along came the elections for 2016. Hillary Clinton appeared to be the heir apparent to the throne of Barack Obama. And she promised, I will carry on only much faster the policies of internationalism that President Obama has pursued. And she planned to do it. However, there was a big chink in the armor. A man by the name of Donald Trump came along in 2016, launched his campaign. And in our next segment, I'm going to tell you how all this took a sudden turn and what this actually means for us today.